Okay, well, welcome everybody to another great CCFM webinar. And we have Matt Feltman here with us with Data Story, and Father Ken Howard here from FaithX. And we're just still gathering. We have about half of our attendees so far, so we'll give it a few more minutes for people to get here. If you just sit tight, you can see Ken Howard and Matt Felton up there. They're using their webcams, and we'll be introducing them further in just a couple minutes. We're going to give it another minute or two past the hour, and then we'll begin, so hold tight. Okay, well, we didn't need a minute or two. Those attendee numbers just started jumping. So it looks like we have most everybody here. And again, this is Mary Tishy with CCFM, and we are bringing you today a great webinar on data-grounded discernment for diocesan planning and decision-making. This is going to help diocesan leaders use current data technology for strategic planning. And we're going to hear from Matt Felton with Data Story and Father Ken Howard with FaithX about how they've been using this technology in some of our member dioceses. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, you have a control panel over on the right side of your screen, and there's a little hand. If you click that, it lets me know you have a question. But you can also, at the bottom, type in your question, and I will see those as they come in. And it's good to type those in when you think of them, because by the end of the webinar, you might have forgotten. So go ahead and type them in. At the end of the webinar, when we have a Q&A session, if you raise your hand, maybe your question's too complicated, you don't want to type it in, I'll click on you and unmute you so you can talk to Matt and Father Ken, and we'll get your questions answered. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Matt Felton.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mary. Good to be with everybody. Thank you for joining us, and greetings from Baltimore. You can see out the back here. I think we're going to pause our cameras while we get into the presentation, but we just wanted to connect as personally as we could here. Ken Howard next to me on one side or the other of your screen, but we'll pause, and we are going to be volleying back and forth through this presentation, and we look forward to sharing it with you. So let me turn that off and we will get going. All right. So starting out, just broadly from an introduction, what we'll be talking about today, our goal is to share with you some best practices that we've experienced, we've been a part of helping dioceses and congregations apply data, technology, apps. We'll talk about all these, give examples of these, and the processes that support them, right? The human processes that support two main initiatives that I imagine everybody on this call has been involved with: strategic missional planning and then operational decision making. So from the broad strategic across the entire diocese down to perhaps individual buildings and understanding that building's context within a community. So those are the goals. We'll be talking about an application, an environment, a data environment called MapDash, specifically oriented towards faith communities. So you'll see a lot of examples of this as we talk about data. It's very engaging. I think you'll find it's a map-based tool. So we're seeing data on maps, and it's for the purpose of missional assessment, planning in this dashboard. We created this at Data Story with some great collaboration with FaithX, Father Ken, and I wanted to, before we get into the presentation, provide some intros to he and I, and a little bit of a backstory. So we'll start with this: a church geek and a data geek walk into a bar. Not actually true. It was a conference room at our office here in Baltimore at Data Story, but Ken and I did meet 3 years ago now, and I'll let him introduce himself in just a moment, but by way of introduction, I'm the guy on the right. I have been in the business of location intelligence, mapping, geographic data for a little over 25 years, and I've helped a lot of organizations, both private and public, and over the last 5 or 6 years, have applied a lot of the work that we do at Data Story towards faith communities that in some ways started right here in Baltimore with the Archdiocese of Baltimore and some schools planning and strategic facilities planning. We'll get into that in a while. But I'm the data geek, and I speak in terms in the form of a map. So I'll leave it there. Ken, would you like to give an introduction on yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Ken Howard. I'm an Episcopal priest. Some say that's Roman Catholic light, but that's what I am. I've been ordained for about 25 years. I'm a 2-time church planter. And by sink or swim, I had to learn over those years what makes churches work. And part of that is really knowing how to understand and engage your community. And so when Matt and I got together and I saw the kind of stuff that he was developing for banks and healthcare and insurance and all of that, and he saw what I was doing in terms of research into what engages communities from the faith standpoint, we just were like a match found in heaven. And we say we started geeking out about then, but we basically said to each other, we've got to get this stuff packaged up and developed and designed for the church and then get it out there. So over the past 3 years, I've been working with probably now I think we're up to about 24 dioceses in various denominations, 3 of which are in the Catholic Church. A number of others are in the Episcopal Church, some in Lutheran Church, and some independent congregations. And we're in discussions with folks in the Methodist area and whatnot. So, but I think that's probably enough. Let's jump on in.
That's great. So we'll jump in. So I'll start, and I mentioned the term location intelligence as part of my introduction. I want to pause and define that because that's the world that we swim in, and I would argue each of you swim in. Location intelligence at its simplest level is your ability to understand quickly the data about place, right? Geographic data. And I have been around a number of your peers and many of you at CCFM events and others, and know that you juggle a lot and you are expected to understand a lot about all the buildings, the communities, make decisions about strategic or tactical maintenance decisions about a building in the context of how is this community doing and what is the purpose. And so all this data is bombarding you, and as creative human beings, we have the ability to understand that and put that into a mind map of sorts and understand place. And so you probably know about the communities where you're working. What our work is to elevate that, to help make that clearer, faster, help you be more confident. Because as we know, communities are changing really fast, and it often feels like the chaos of all these data points hitting us in the head. So our work that we'll be talking about within location intelligence is held up by what we call 4 pillars, represented as these 4 parts of that head. And the whole idea of this is to help you transform data into meaning and then into action. And so if you think about seeing data in new ways and then putting that into community context, and then there's ways to analyze it and then sharing it with others so that you make decision and you have a level of confidence in whatever strategic or tactical decision you might be making. This is this process, and it's an iterative process. So as we go through here and ask, where am I in the data? What does it mean? What's it calling me to do? And then how do I get others to be with me in what might be a tough decision or might be a really clear decision, but we all want to be on the same page and have a confident discernment about it. And then we repeat. So really quickly, so that you understand out of the head and what this means, imagine that this map, we've taken a list of facilities that you might manage. These might be parish buildings or schools within a diocese, and we put them on the map. The location of the dot represents the location of the building. The size of the dot might represent something like square feet, right? So you would be able to see in this example in Charlotte that we have some larger facilities, we have some smaller facilities out in the periphery of this community. And then the color represents, maybe it's the age of the facility. So you can see here a very old facility in dark red. These orange are less old, and then this lighter yellow color represent newer locations. So transforming what would be a spreadsheet into a map like this can help you identify where you are, and it accelerates your ability to take in a lot of information. That's what we call visualizing data. Contextualizing this data is when you're able to put this into the context of demographics, psychographics. There's a ton of data some of you may have access to, some of you may not, but know that it's out there. It exists in government, it exists in the market. This example is showing areas of this community that are growing. So the greener it is, the more that community is growing. So if you think about making a facility planning decision, and you do so in the context of a bright green area versus a not so bright green, you can do that of knowing, is that community growing or not. This heat map represents the ability to analyze data. So imagine if these bright red areas were showing where the community is fertile for some kind of a new ministry. You can look at your facility locations in the context of, are we in the right place? Not that you move building, but you might understand whether it's worth investing at a greater level from a maintenance standpoint, or understanding where there might be some virtual presence in the community in terms of some outreach. And then lastly, there's this notion of socializing these insights. So by socializing, I mean sharing, collaborating. It's often not enough for one person to know what the data is saying. You need other people to be on board with you. And so we often will help create what we call a data story. You're experiencing one right now as we're going through and we're looking at maps and images. And we find these as useful ways to organize a lot of data and share it quickly with the stakeholders that matter. I hand it over to Ken.
So we're going to be talking now about strategic missional planning. Matt and I will be kind of bouncing back and forth. Matt kind of hitting the what in terms of the technology, and I'll be hitting the why and how you go about putting this into use as you begin to do strategic planning. These will tend to parallel, as you will notice, the 4 pillars. But they're more or less 4 steps that you go through. And it's not rocket science either to mix a metaphor. It's basic planning, basic problem solving. So we start by gathering data, we do an opportunity assessment, go from there to strategy development, and then we go from there to strategy implementation and repeat as necessary. So quickly jumping through those steps, and we'll get into greater detail as we go along. The first step is defining the neighborhood and gathering data. And this is bringing your team together, gathering and orienting them, defining the membership and the ministry areas of the place, the congregation which you're studying, and define the data needs and start gathering the data. Then step 2 is doing a missional assessment, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to look at the community around you using tools, data tools like Mapdash or other tools, to identify and prioritize missional opportunities and challenges that are out there in the community around you, some of which you may be unaware of. And you do that through demographic statistics, trends, and projections. Third is strategy development, and that's getting at identifying the strategies that engage those missional opportunities and challenges that you have already found. and doing that by bringing to bear your organizational strengths and addressing your organizational weaknesses so that you can engage the opportunities and challenges that you see. And then finally, strategy implementation. And to do this, you're trying to ensure maximum impact. So you have an action plan, but you also have a communication plan. And that's where this kind of socializing technology comes in. You need to do pilot testing. You need ground-based coaching, data-grounded coaching. So that's, in a nutshell, the strategic planning process. Planning process.
So those areas that Ken and I covered were the, as Ken likes to say, the coat rack that we're hanging the ideas on. There's 4 pillars of location intelligence. There's 4 steps of planning. One way I like to think about this is I'll speak to the what and Ken speaks to the why. I think we both speak each other's language very, very well, but in terms of framing this out, that will help you understand this a bit. So I've included, with permission, some examples from our work within the Archdiocese of Baltimore and their implementation of MapDash. And I want to give you some more specific examples of what we mean by visualizing data. This, I'll point out, is a dashboard with a map front and center. We have some map layers, and then the colors represent things on the map. There also is the ability to touch anything on that map to get more information. So it's important to note that it's not just a map, it's actually a database presented as a map. So as you click on something like this parish boundary here that we see down here, we can reveal some statistics about it. But loosely, where are we in the community? Where are worship sites? Where are these Catholic schools? Where are the locations of parish boundaries? And what Baltimore is doing is some collaborative work of defining broader pastorates where certain parishes are collaborating and sharing resources. So seeing the data in this way alone is enormously insightful. And what you're not able to see here, but we can show you later if there's time, is the ability to zoom in and out and interact and go to different places within your community on the map. Another example of visualizing data that you have, and you do have this data, it's just not often presented this way, would be seeing the location of parishioner households. Here, this map has been filtered for the Church of the Nativity as well as St. John the Evangelist. And what you'll see is some orange dots here for Nativity and these brighter yellow dots for St. John. This pattern might help you understand from where people come, how wide is the reach. Again, this has implications for transportation. This has implications for collaboration. Lots of things that just visualizing your data in new ways helps you discern and understand. And you do analysis in your head, but really you're just looking at that data through this lens of a map. There is also, as I mentioned, the ability to tap on a location. So here I've tapped on this parish boundary. You see this blue outline on the map. And within that, there's a number of statistics. So the map presents back a pie chart representing how many parishioners from other parishes live within my parish. And you can get a sense of how much in and out migration there might be. Again, useful context for planning. And I'm hovered over this particular pie chart. As you would expect, it's the largest percentage. We see there's 477 registered households inside of the boundary of that parish. Another example of visualization, and this will make Mary happy, is some work that we've done of taking the members of CCFM and putting them onto a map. Now I'm gonna break out of this presentation for a moment, and I want to show you this live. So on the CCFM webpage, if you haven't seen this, I encourage you to check it out. At the very top, under the member directory, a number of months ago, we worked with Mary and team to take a spreadsheet and put it on a map. And the idea here, I'll just imagine that somebody's looking at this from Chicago. If I am in Chicago and I want to know who are some other folks that I didn't know they were members of CCFM, maybe it's a neighboring diocese. So if I pull out a little bit here, I'm just scrolling the wheel on my mouse and I can see who else is nearby. Now this is an interactive map, and we have the ability to tap on something to see more information about here would be a corporate member. If I click on one of these, we see in the Diocese of Rockford, we see an individual, Jody, who's the Director of Finance and Administration. So being able to understand who's who in terms of other members in your community, what you'll, oh, there we go, is that this is changing. So I could see that we have 16 corporate members. So maybe there's resources in your community that you'd want to work with, engineers and others, or who are the other members from diocese, and tap on any one of these to see their information and have that appear. So this is a tool for you. Encourage you to use it. Any feedback is welcome on this, but powerful example of just taking a spreadsheet, putting it on a map, and seeing it and experiencing in a new way of who's nearby me, who might I collaborate with. So I'm gonna hop back to here and fill this up and hand it back to Ken. Ken, are you there?
I'm there. I'm there.
Okay.
I turned it off. I muted myself to cough and didn't turn it back on.
Okay.
So where the rubber hits the road with missional planning is, and how it goes along with parallels the location intelligence, is the first step is defining your neighborhood and collecting the data about your neighborhood. So how do you do this? Well, one of the ways that we go about this is that we begin to look at defining both your mission web boundary, which defines your ministry area. And those are equidistant drive times from same denomination congregations. And then your membership area, which is a 15-minute drive time, generally is a good marker for your membership area, because 70% of people from any area, 70% of any congregation's people are going to come from within 15 minutes. And it's helpful to look at it this way, because mission area, the membership area and the ministry area are different. And so you need to look at both of those, and you need to look at them in terms of what the population is like, but also what the issues are out in the community that you need to deal with. And what you're needing to do when you start this, you also, in addition to pulling the data together, you also have to you have to clarify what is your vision, what is your mission, so that you know that you're heading in the right direction with this. What's your scope and what are your goals in the project? Who are the important people to be on the team? There may be some people like you who work with buildings, but there are also maybe people on this team that are people who are permission givers or permission withholders. And then you need to look at time frames, deliverables, and budget. And then if we can move on to the next one.
Okay, so back to me. Once your data is transformed into this new view on the map, so these might be these parish and school locations, there is a wealth of other data that can be at your fingertips as it relates to demographics. So here's an example of looking at age, but seeing age through the lens. These different colors represent predominant generations. So the redder this map is, the more millennials live in that area. And the more yellow it is, you can see this from on the left-hand side here, this map legend, the more boomers that live in an area. Again, this has enormous implications of who are the people in your community, what, you know, how do you serve them with a facility, with a ministry, with the work that's being done. We also can take, remember we had those parishioner households, we can compare that to the total population. Now in our work in banking and healthcare and retail, we would call this market share, but really this is a mission share of sorts. This is what percent of a given community, and these, by the way, these little bins of data are census block groups. So it's the smallest unit of measure that we can put a statistic into, and you'll see that they can get very small in urban areas. But this map is showing what we call Catholicity. The brighter the red on the map, the higher the percentage of registered households who are registered as Catholic. So that's important community context, demographic context, and we've combined some of your data with some demographics data in this case. The number of layers that could be put on this map are virtually limitless. These are a couple of examples to just stimulate your thinking. This might be looking at community issues. There's lots of ways we could do that, but understanding unemployment. The darker color on the map are higher percentages of unemployed individuals, and then the lighter colors are lower percentages. There is also a type of data known as psychographics. Generally, we would call these lifestyles. And what this does is roll up a number of demographic and behavioral characteristics to help understand the nature of the families living in a given community. Now, I will pause and point out that we recognize 110% that there is diversity, and these types of descriptors are meant to be tools, but not to define people. What this is coming from is an understanding of the demographics and the way they spend their money and the way that they live and interact. And so it's useful context when thought of in the broad context of all the other data. And this map, these different colors represent, each one represents one of 66 different psychographic segments. I've tapped on one small community here, and we'll see that it's segment 8C. They're given these names. We did not come up with this, but bright young professionals. So you can imagine what that might conjure up. That helps you understand in this area. We might have a lot of those bright young professionals. That influences decisions about who's there, who's not there. And you'll see in a moment, if we clicked on this to view a report, there would be a description of the lifestyles of those individuals. And I'll let Ken will speak to that. Also, in terms of context, seeing your parish and school locations in the context of, I call this co-opetition. These are other community assets that if it's a school, you might want to know what other schools or daycare facilities are in a community. They might be feeders to your schools. They might be, in some sense, a competitive landscape that you'd want to understand and figure out how that might turn into a collaboration, or maybe a certain area is oversaturated with schools and daycare facilities, and your limited resources are better focused in another area. So being able to see this on a map and tap on something, you'll notice these are public and private schools, these dots. We tap on it and you can see that there's 460 students at this Pot Spring Elementary, vis-a-vis where one of our schools might be a diocesan school. So these different elements of context help you do the types of things Ken will talk about here in terms of beginning to really understand your community.
Okay, so the second step that we're talking about in strategic missional planning is doing the missional assessment, looking at assessing the missional opportunities and also the challenges that are out in the community, looking at it through demographic and lifestyle statistics, trends, and projections. So how do you go about doing this? Well, here's the way we go about it in looking at a particular congregation. This is a congregation in Gaithersburg, Maryland. So we start, if you'll continue to roll up, Matt. Oop, nope.
No text on this one.
Yeah, that's where the.
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, so if you look at that blue spot in the middle, you'll see we've dropped a pin right on top of that congregation in Gaithersburg. You'll see a blue area, and then you'll see a larger red area. The blue area the red area is your membership area. That's where 70% of the people, members of that congregation will come from. And the light blue area that's smaller in the middle, that is what you own in terms of what you're responsible for in terms of the community around you. Looking at it this way helps you get beyond looking at just parish boundaries, because we all know that the further we get into this current age, the less people respect any boundaries at all in terms of context. So what actual legal parish the person falls into doesn't necessarily determine where they go. So this is a way to help you conceptualize that. And then what we do is we develop what we call a neighborhood missional intelligence report, for those two areas, the ministry area and the membership area. And we look at about 40 different demographic statistics, trends, projections, some that look at the at who is out there, what the neighborhood population is like, how many there are, how fast it's growing, how many households, what is the generational breakdown. You see this particular area has about 25% millennials. And if you were to hover over those, you'd see that it's actually relatively balanced, which is a good thing, because if you're in an area that, if you're looking at a building in a particular area and you find out that if you have only millennials, if you have only boomers, you know you've got money for the congregation to support the building now, but you don't have a future. But if you only had millennials, you'd have a future, but no resources in the present. So it's good to find an area that is balanced in that way. If we could go ahead and move forward. So this is when you click on that. Can you roll back just a second, Matt?
Yep.
So over there in the corner, Matt's pointing at enterprising professionals. That is one of those 67 different population segments. That's the top population segment in that area. So what we do, this, by the way, this is called a missional context report. This is what I spent about a year and a half developing by comparing marketing data to and correlating that to particular behaviors that you need to know about within the church, things that will be helpful in designing your program. We look at 10 areas: communication, technology, education, formation, neighborhood issues that are out there, outreach, people's ability to give, people's ability to attend midweek, a number of different kinds of things that you need to know that can give you some insights into the people that you're dealing with out there. Again, as Matt said, people are everybody's different, but this kind of looks at ways in which they tend to overlap with each other in terms of their behaviors, in terms of their needs, and in terms of what the neighborhood is like. And if you move on from there. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we find in missional planning in step 2, when we're doing the missional assessment, is we have just about every time we do this, we have a holy crap moment where somebody looks at one demographic and says, I never knew they were there. This particular congregation, Trinity Church in Elk Ridge, Maryland, they're a church full of boomers. We looked at the at lifestyles, and we discovered, much to their excitement, that there were 100 millennials literally across the street from the church that they didn't know were there. And it drove them immediately to ask the question, why don't we see them? And I didn't have the heart to tell them that they also had about 1,000 Gen Z behind them, but they came across about that themselves. So this is an important thing to know, because you think you know your neighborhoods. We all think we know our neighborhoods, but we tend to understand the people that are most like us. And when you have populations that are different from us, they tend to go to different coffee shops. They tend to shop in different places. They tend to walk in a different part of town. They have different kinds of recreational habits. And so you need to know who's out there so that you can intend to see them, because you won't see them unless you have the intention to find out where they are and go find them.
Okay, so moving on, and we've looked at our data, we've visualized it, we've put it in context. So there's all these demographics. I love that story that Ken just shared. I've heard it many times and I still love it. The third pillar that I referenced is your ability to analyze this data. Now, don't need to convince anybody that computing power is a great thing. This is a lot of data. What we're able to support is a broad analysis to answer questions, many different types of questions. A couple of examples of these you'll see here. So we talked about a 15-minute drive time. So in and around St. John the Evangelist, we can look at what is the 15-minute drive time. And notice what I've done here is overlaid 2 of those 15-minute drive times. And we can see that these 2 churches are relatively not overlapping. There's a little bit of area in the middle here. If we want to know some statistics for this 15-minute drive time, this big area around St. John, again, we tap on that, and you can see that there's 34,000 people that are within that 15-minute drive time, and that they have a median income of 110, and there's 485 unemployed, and on and on and on down through here. What you'll see too, not interactive, I can show you that later if you'd like, is this ability to turn on and look at what if we collaborate these 2 parishes? What if we collaborate these 3? What does it look like? The ability to run scenarios with the data very quickly, that's what speeds up that discernment and decision-making process. Another example of that same type of overlapping drive time, you'll notice here we have Church of the Nativity and we have St. Joseph. St. Joseph are these blue dots, Church of the Nativity are these gold dots. Look how they're mixed and mingled here. We look at the 15-minute drive times and see that they're almost covering the same area. Now, understanding there might be historical and personal differences and individual character of each of these individual parishes, that's a creative human level of understanding of this, but that's done in the context of, wow, we're sharing the same community, and folks driving 15 minutes could get one or the other pretty easily. So as you're talking about areas of collaboration, facility sharing and such, these types of maps become really useful to get your head around those scenarios. We also talked about, Ken talked about these earlier, there is some analysis that's performed under what we call mission webs. You see these in a broad sense here. These are these areas of greatest geographic influence, meaning they're nearest. So just to orient you to this map a little bit, these colors here are shown on the map, and the squiggly black lines are representing drive times around each of these parish locations. And each parish, if you'd imagine driving the roads out from each until each one runs into the other, and then we put a line there. And so you're able to see who is nearest to any given parish location. So Church of the Nativity, notice how there's this bit of a crescent because of how the roads must flow. Somebody living out here is closer to Church of the Nativity than any other church, right? Now it's interesting to overlay this with these blue lines. These are parish boundaries. And Ken showed these separately. I'm putting them here together because we're talking about an analysis. This further helps you understand that while a historic and kind of long-standing parish boundary is important and exists, and I understand the history around those, there also is a practical neighborhood, and sometimes those are well aligned and sometimes those are very different. So a map like this helps you see, like down here, the parish boundary in blue is about the same as the mission web boundary. Church of the Nativity, some of these other ones, those lines don't intersect. So it's another lens through which you can view communities and your reach. Also in the realm of analysis, and Ken can speak much more to this, I'll speak to the methodology, which is our ability of taking in some core fundamental data from the folks we work with, like yourselves, about attendance, membership, age, and some basic financials. We can feed that into this algorithm of sorts that generates a vitality score. And this vitality score is represented in these colors. Green is healthy, red is or not vital. And then this orangey yellow in the middle is because we have a mix. So for this particular location, what a map like this does and what this Congregational Vitality Index does is helps you get your head around a lot of data and say at this location, we've got decent attendance. We have a lot of members, but they're not showing up. But we're probably really old or we're really young. Imagining in this example, it's really old, and our finances are not strong. So when you're making decisions, again, about collaboration, about new growth, or about reorienting, you might want to pair a vital parish with a less than vital parish. I know in the work in Baltimore that we did of helping them establish those pastorates, that type of thinking was, not necessarily putting two non-vital ones together or two vital ones, but let's buddy up, let's pair up with some that are strong in some areas and weak in others. Our experience of this is to give you an environment to quickly get the information and tap on this dot to get the info, tap on that dot and get some different info. And that's a Congregational Vitality Index. So Ken will talk a little bit about what this looks like in action.
Yes, and I would just mention that some of the things that we're saying may sound like they're judgments, but what we're really about is trying to help people see the truth about themselves and the truth about their neighborhood. And then they can make the judgments and bring to bear their own values in terms of deciding what is really going on, what it is calling them to do, and so forth. So moving into strategy development, that's step 3. What we're trying to do at that point is, now that you know the missional opportunities and challenges that are existing and that are emerging, one of the things that the reason I say emerging is because you may have noticed that we included a lot of projections in the assessment. So when we're talking about things like congregational sustainability, that is a projection of what's going to be like for the congregation in the future. So we're taking that and we're tying it to your own internal data, to your own internal strengths and weaknesses, so that you can best begin to develop strategies that, based on your strengths and weaknesses, that will help you engage the opportunities. So one of the ways you do that is that you can use what we call a missional opportunity index. We've taken 4 key drivers of missional opportunity, which are population growth, diversity growth, generational balance. I mentioned before about boomers versus millennials, and then kind of competition between same denomination congregations. And it's unfortunate, but the research tells us that unless people decide to cooperate, that same denomination congregations are their biggest competitors. So what we've done here, though, you can see the congregation spread across the map, and the map has green, yellow, and red. The green areas are areas of high missional opportunity. The red areas are of high missional challenge, low missional opportunity, or looking at it a different way, high missional challenge. The other areas around there, you see areas that are yellow to light green, and those are areas of moderate missional opportunity. And so when you paint this across the entire diocese using that heat map that Matt showed you before, then you can begin to say, am I in an area of high missional opportunity? That'll lead me to do one thing, might lead me to develop one kind of strategy. But if you're in an area of low missional opportunity, it might require an entirely different strategy altogether. And what we find when we go out there and we look at congregational vitality, which is measuring key indicators inside the church about the church's health, and compare that to how vital they should be able to be based on the neighborhood around them, based on population growth, based on diversity growth, etc. We find that what is most often the case is that most congregations are not fully engaging the missional opportunity that is out there. And this allows them to see, when they're seeing the truth about themselves, if it says they're a low vitality congregation, but they're in a green area or a light green area, that says you've got a lot of room for improvement. And this is this is typical of just about every diocese that we've gone into. So what that leads you to is it could tell you that you wanted to start a new congregation. If there was an area of high missional opportunity and you didn't have a presence, you might build a new building there. But you also find situations like this where you see an area of high missional opportunity in the middle of 5 congregations. Now they weren't dumb. They didn't. There was missional opportunities in their areas when they planted those churches there. But times change, people move. And so now the missional opportunity has moved into an area that's between them. What happens if they compete for that area, they'll never succeed. An example in this area, all 5 had noticed that there is a large Hispanic population in that green area, and they were all trying to reap that congregation. All 5 were trying to start Spanish language services, and none of them could succeed in doing it. So they ended up developing a collaborative approach to their ministry, and it was just seeing this move them to it more quickly than if you were to just try and talk them through or show them data. And one of the things that happens as we go out into dioceses is that we find out that we can sharpen our tool based on the feedback that we're getting from the diocese. The Diocese of Lansing is in a project with us in which they are trying to realign their resources with the mission of the diocese. And when we started to explore congregational vitality in the Catholic realm, we realized based on their feedback that we could refine that and develop a better algorithm based on their input. So they helped us sharpen our stewardship algorithms.
Okay, and then bringing this home, so we've visualized our data, we've contextualized it, we've analyzed it. It's not enough for one person to know. We need to share it with others. And you might have noticed that the name of our company is Data Story. So we do love data, but we fully acknowledge that data alone, it's pretty pointless, honestly. As this says, it doesn't change minds or behavior unless it tells a story. If we can discern the meaning in the data, in other words, if we can give the data a voice and see it through, in our case, a lens of a map and what are the relationships that matter, then there's meaning and there's context and there's confidence in bold decisions, new decisions, tough decisions, any kind of decision. There's a grounding, and you want others at your side and having your back for knowing that why you're making that decision. So this notion of storytelling, we like to think of what we do is reveal the story. This guy is not loading. So let me see if I can get to that really quickly because I have a backup here. Please hold on to the handrail as I do this. It's like a flashback, right? Okay. So when we worked with of their schools, we did a lot of this kind of work that we're talking about here. And what we did so that we didn't have to be in the room all the time talking about it and pulling levers is put it into something we call a data story. So you'll notice the data on the right and the story on the left. This is interactive, much like we're scrolling through today and the story is changing and the maps are changing. These, if I were to look at this live and click on this, the map would change and I would reveal information about Our Lady of Mount Carmel School. We might look at enrollment. We might look at median household income for a given area. So these stories are a way to put a lot of data into an easy to digest narrative. Another example of this is a congregation we worked with that did a deep dive into the analysis of their attendees. We took a list of addresses, we mapped them, we looked at what other data fell, where those dots fell on the map, and we identified what are the over and underrepresented lifestyles in this community. And so this map, which you can see here had many chapters, was part of a presentation to their senior leadership to help them understand, who are we? Here's the location of the church. Here's a center of gravity. So they were pulling more from the south, and that had implications for them and their strategic planning. We also looked at these different, where does 50% and 80% of those attendees come from? And so these yellow lines, they're all statistical measures. And again, you can tap on this, get information linked to one of those missional context reports that Ken shared earlier about individuals' lifestyles. So socializing this data through data stories is a way of getting it finally into the hands of those that you want to support your decisions. Ken?
So you've gathered your data, you've put together your team, you've done your assessment and analyzed the data, you've come up with a strategic plan. Now what do? You have to implement. And one of the things that you need to think about is, how do you maximize your impact of the implementation of your strategy? And part of the way you do that is with a communication plan. Another way that you do that is by pilot testing, starting small, trying a small thing, and then iterating it to make it bigger, and adding more to the program as you learn whether what you're doing in the pilot is working or not. And we find that people are that people who are trying to start congregations or rejuvenate congregations do a lot better in that they're more likely to be successful if they have somebody who can serve as a coach, who can kind of hold their hand as they walk through the process and make sure that they look in their blind spots. So what do we find, and how does this kind of impact, how does it happen? And one of the things that we found is, when you can show people the data, they almost immediately start coming to their own conclusions. You don't have to force them to come to your conclusion. They can see the data and understand what it means. So in this diocese, in the New York area, they identified low vitality congregations in a low missional opportunity area, and that allowed them to start frank and transparent conversations about courageous closure, closing sooner than you might have otherwise, or finding alternative forms of ministry. A building is not always good for ministry. It can sometimes be a drag on ministry, especially if you're in an area of low missional opportunity. So you might want to rejigger your strategy. On the other hand, and let me just mention that when you come to a congregation and that you've got a hunch that it needs to close, if we do it the old-fashioned way, where we just try and sit down and tell them that we've decided that they're not vital and they need to close, they're going to resist that. But my experience with this is that if you can show people that they're of low vitality in a low sustainability area, then they will say to themselves, we need to, what they'll say to themselves is, it's not our fault. Because the main thing that's holding people back from coming to that decision is that they think that they're doing something wrong. And this tells them that they're not doing something wrong. The area that they're in is dying, and so their church is dying with it. But then you have areas where you have the converse is the case. And so you have a low vitality congregation and a high vitality area, high missional opportunity area. And this helped the diocese decide that this will be a congregation that we need to put some resources in, because if we improve their building, if we help them develop their programs, etc., whatever the solution is, that there will be a good return on investment for that. And doing this helps them actually kind of go through what you might call a triage process and decide, where do we get the most bang for our buck? So we can move on from there. And so Matt mentioned congregations that have overlapping drive time. So you'll see these two congregations here in the Baltimore area. When we showed them this, it was another holy crap moment. They looked at that and said, holy crap, we basically serve the same community. Why are we two different churches? That immediately put the question to them. And it was somebody, a member of the congregation, who was watching this, not the priest or the bishop or anybody else in a position of authority, but people in the pews saying, we really need to think about whether we need to be one parish or two. So when they did that, they began to look at whether they should merge or not. And so what they are talking about now is they've agreed on a merger together. They looked at the one that had more opportunity, which is the one on the left. When you compare the vitality to the sustainability, their margin, as we call it, is about a 5-point margin. That's the place we want to put our resources in. They had a better building. They had a full-time priest and could afford one. And then the other one was a building that was falling down around them. They could only afford a part-time priest. And so they decided they would merge into the building of the congregation on the left. And again, that happened much more quickly than it might have had you had to do this without being able to show them that they were serving one area, the same exact area.
So with that, we have hit the end of our formal presentation, and it looks like we have a couple of minutes. If there are any questions that have come in, we would be happy to take them now and or follow up as anyone would want.
Yeah. So thank you both to Matt and Father Ken. We are really appreciative. I think this gave our members a really good, a lot to think about different ways to use data. I did have a few questions come in. One of them came in early on and wanted to know who is feeding the data into the quote unquote map software. So once you've collected all that data, how does that get fed in?
Yeah, so I'll take that, Ken.
Yeah.
So the MapDash software comes with a lot of data. So if the question was around the demographics, the community data of other schools and other things, that's part of what that app is about, that dashboard. The question was probably, how do we take it out of something like Parasoft or out of a facility spreadsheet or an assessment? That's work that our team is very comfortable doing, of turning the sometimes mess of data, not always a mess, but worst case scenario, into something like what you saw on the screen. So we provide professional services to do that. We have also worked with certain dioceses that have in-house teams who might use similar technology or can help us prepare that data to make that process easier and make it cleaner. So along the continuum of, some are already using what's called GIS, Geographic Information Systems data, and we can work with it. I would say many who we've worked with give us some version of a pile of data and we transform it into what you saw.
Yeah. And one question is getting the right data. And so one of the things that often happens, and this is where I come in, where FaithX comes in, is that different congregations will often keep data differently than others. Different dioceses will keep it differently. So part of the process of collecting the data is to say, where do we get the data that represents the population membership most accurately, the population growth most accurately? And so we've been able to help some dioceses say, well, these particular counts that you have go in this bucket, and this other group of accounts go into that bucket. So there is some help available for that.
Okay, and another question we have is, have you guys done any work in the energy efficiency area? In other words, maybe looking at, I think this member is thinking about like benchmarking and looking at how different parishes are utilizing energy. Can this be a tool to help in seeing that?
Well, one of the things I'll say, and I'm trying to see if there's an example that I could show, and I'll answer this in the form of an interactive map so that you can see this and what this looks like live. You saw some examples where the color of the dot or the symbol was different. When we did the work with the schools, there was an assessment of the educational effectiveness. So there was a third-party consultant that provided an assessment, and we represented a version of the map where the different colors represented the effectiveness score. The closest I would answer that question is if there was data about that efficiency that you had that, I'll overstate this, maybe was in a pile, we could turn it into a map where different colors represented different levels of efficiency. And what you'll notice here as I hop around is we could tap on something to see the information behind it. So this doesn't have a lot of statistics behind it, but you could have some statistics behind parish locations that would reveal energy efficiency.
Well, and that might be something I could even add to, Matt, on both of those questions, that getting our information on the CCFM website. This is our first year that we're finishing here that has that information, but there's so much more that I know that we can be putting on there. And so it's a matter of what information do you have and what do you want to show, the more you feed into it. So to me, it's almost a limitless capability of what are you trying to discern.
Right.
That's correct.
We have one more question. Again, this came in early on. The strategic missional planning that you were talking about in the early part of the presentation, is that something that, are there costs involved with that? Is that something Data Story can help? It sounded like Ken maybe answered this earlier about helping to figure out what are the questions that need to be asked, but I think that's what they're asking is, are there costs involved with that, and can Data Story help with the strategic missional planning?
Yeah, Ken, I'm going to answer real quickly and let you do the bulk of it. Data Story packs the pack, and Ken helps you navigate the walk. We use that metaphor, and that's how we work together. So Data Story provides the data, the app, the application, and then Ken, you can answer that question more broadly.
Yeah. FaithX is in a sense the Sherpa that helps you climb the mountain. What we do is help you through that process, through those 4 steps. There is a cost involved. We've worked really hard to try and turn that into discrete bites that are bite-sized for a congregation or for a diocese, and package different services together based on what people need and can afford. So some congregations will just do the assessment, just to invite FaithX in to help them go through the assessment, and then they'll take it from there and they'll do the strategy development. Others want to go all the way through, and we don't want you to have any services from us that you don't need. And so part of what we do is when you are deciding that you want to enter a strategic missional planning process, we do a scope with you where we kind of look at what needs to happen, what you think needs to be happen, and what are your options for carrying that out, and where are you going to need data, and where you're going to need consulting help.
Sounds great.
It tends to be a fairly collaborative process.
Mm-hmm. Well, I imagine different people across all the memberships, like everything, some people are going to be really at a loss and needing help, and others will have their data and just want to convert it.
Yeah.
So um, it's just good to know the help is there.
Yeah.
I don't have any other questions coming in right now. So again, this webinar has been recorded as always. It will be available to the CCFM members on the CCFM website in a couple of days. And of course, you can always reach Matt or Father Ken through CCFM. They're on the website listed on the directory. Or you can contact me and I can put you in touch. But we appreciate their time today and this wonderful resource, getting us thinking about all the different ways we can be using this. So thank you, and thank you to our members for attending. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye, everyone.